Call us to order.
Okay, ready? Okay, so we will call the meeting of the Palo Alto City Council to order. This is June 4, 2015. Would the clerk call the roll, please?
Councilmember Berman?
Here.
Councilmember Burt?
Here.
Councilmember Du Bois?
Here.
Councilmember Filsa?
Here.
Mayor Holman?
Here.
Councilmember Niss? Councilmember Scharf? Vice Mayor Schmidt?
Here.
Councilmember Walbach?
Here.
6 present.
Thank you. And we are
Seven.
here, 7, yes. And we are here this evening to interview candidates for the Architectural Review Board. We have 4 candidates, and our first candidate is Peter Balte. And
I'm at the head of the table.
you are.
There's
new
the
layout.
council. You're making me feel,
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what to say.
We're trying to figure out how we can all see each other.
Well, you can
Right.
see me.
Exactly. So we have allotted 10 minutes for each interview, and what our practice is that you'll have a minute or so to do any kind of introductory comments that you might like to make, and then council members will ask questions, and then you'll have time to do some wrap-up comments if we don't take them all up for questions.
Sounds great.
So, okay?
So my name's Peter Balte. I'm the principal architect at Topos Architects in town here. I've spent pretty much my entire professional career working in Palo Alto. We do mostly residential work, a few commercial projects. So we've done 20, 30, several dozen homes in town. I worked on the Town and Country Shopping Center, some of the tenant improvements there just for some commercial projects. I've served on architecture review boards up in Redwood City and San Mateo County previously. I'm just really looking for an opportunity to give back. It seems most architects sooner or later cycle through some of these review boards. I've done it before and enjoy doing it. I think I'm offering the city too, though, something that it's important to have to be a good architect and to understand what you're reviewing, where you can push to make changes and make improvements. It's also important to be able to work with the other members of the board and to be able to persuade and bring people along to a point of view. I say that because what I've observed lately with the review board is that the architects, the applicants, seem almost to be too persuasive. There's not enough pushback, in my opinion. And what I think I can bring to that board is both a sense of, I think we've gone too far in letting buildings be too quickly approved that are perhaps too large or too out of context, is perhaps the more important term. And the Architecture Review Board doesn't seem to have enough oomph amongst themselves to bring that back around. You've lost several pretty good architects on that board over the past few years. I have a close colleague with Judy Wasserman, and she's quite good. It's a real shame not to have somebody like that there. But I can offer that to you on the board, that I'm going to try hard to persuade other members to come along, to stand up perhaps a little bit more. I'm going to leave it at that for a quick 2 minutes.
All right, thank you. Let the record show that Councilmember Niss has joined us. Colleagues, we don't have lights, and it's a little difficult to see you, so if you want to ask a question, please make yourself prominently known. Colleagues, questions? Vice Mayor Schmidt.
Very interesting answers to some of the questions. You used the term subjective requirements, things like compatibility, you just use the term out of context.
Is your mic on?
Can you give us a little description of what process you go through to help your colleagues think differently about projects?
I think a lot of it comes from really understanding where buildings are going. Let me dive right into the project at 429 University. It was a 4-story, fairly contemporary building that you are all very familiar with. I was at that meeting where you were basically knocking it down, and I left really scratching my head a lot, thinking about what's going on. And I work right up next to that, and just walking by, there's another building where the Garden Court Hotel is, which is also a 4-story building. It's also pretty big. And yet somehow that one fits right in. That's contextually, it's a beloved building at this point. It's only 30 years old. And it's got some weird traces of the design of postmodern columns and stuff in the front. But for the most part, having that kind of knowledge, so sitting with a group of guys and saying, look, there's things we can do to make this building fit in better. The Garden Court Hotel has a huge covered portico in the front where all of us have probably had lunch once or twice. It's a pleasant spot. Between that and the trees, the mass of the building is pretty diminished. So having those examples to bring other members of the board along and being very versatile with explaining things. The building at 429 didn't try to do any of that. It's a straight facade. It's very dramatic looking. And I'm not saying we don't all like the drama, but the context of the town doesn't work.
Good, thank you.
So what would you have done differently at 429 University? Well, as on the ARB, how would you have guided the applicant?
I think that's coming up for review still, so I probably
have your
shouldn't
mic on?
address that.
And Greg, do you have yours off?
Sorry. So on a building like 429 University, how would you have guided the applicant if you were on the ARB?
Well, let's talk hypothetically, because I don't want to address that particular building, but I think you need to be more firm saying it's just too tall. I mean, the 40 feet of frontage on University Avenue like that, I don't see too many architecture tricks without stepping it back a lot or pushing it down somehow. What the Garden Court Hotel did, the building steps back 10 feet, then it steps up. Well, you need to be able to say that to somebody, to let Ken Hayes, Ken, you know, we're good friends, but you gotta come along, man. You can't let your client just push you to get the extra square footage. It's more than that.
So the municipal code, suppose the municipal code says actually you can't have a building that high and fits in the FAR guidelines.
Well, I've
Under
come,
what circumstances can you say, make it smaller?
okay, I've come around just in the past year to really think twice about that. When we design houses in Palo Alto, there's a 30-foot height limit. You can build a building 30 feet high. I can't remember the time somebody's approved a 30-foot tall building in town because it's never in context. There's no other high buildings like that. We all very easily accept the fact that that 30-foot objective requirement, 30 feet in the code, doesn't mean you can build to that maximum every single time. It means only if everything else fits into place is at the maximum. I think we need to be taking the same approach with the FAR, at least a little bit more. You're not guaranteed the right to build to the maximum square footage if the other pieces don't fall into place. The building has to be contextually compatible. The mass has to
Would you
fit.
put me in line?
Yes.
I don't want to keep going on
Okay.
about it, but I think FAR is another regulation that can be
Okay.
improved.
Pat?
Well, just following up on that, are you familiar with the findings that must be made for approval of architectural projects?
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I couldn't quote them to you now, but
Yeah.
it's pretty standard in most projects that we do. that
And
get
so
approved.
in this, along the lines of what you were describing of that the maximums are not guarantees and they're certainly not minimums, which with exceptions in many cases we've seen that they've kind of morphed into minimums. It's in my understanding, it's really what you were describing is based upon the findings and whether you can make the findings that would in some circumstances say no, a building to the maximum height in this circumstance or whatever given setbacks or other elements can't meet the findings, and therefore it's not a given that FARs are always granted to the maximum. Is that along the lines of what you're thinking?
That's absolutely what I'm saying. Yeah, the findings are essentially the legal mechanism by which you say it's not compatible. You find that it's not compatible for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
The findings are that's what you stand on.
Good. Okay.
Liz?
So you made the most interesting comment,
Thank you.
and I actually hadn't thought of it this way before.
Thanks, David.
Previously, how often do you think the applicant, or in this case, the person who wants their building built, puts pressure on the architect to do it their way?
Every time.
I quite honestly hadn't thought of that person saying, you know, I'm a better architect than you are, Peter. This is what I want.
Clients are developing buildings in Palo Alto for the money. The dollar per square foot, it's pretty basic. You don't have to be a developer, a big-time mogul to see this.
I mean, there's money to be made, huh?
And it's about the square footage, rental square footage, retail square footage. The compatibility of the town shouldn't be for sale. These things transcend that by a lot. And so it's important
Good
to be able to
quote.
go back
No
to them
reporter
and
here, but that's
push.
a good quote.
No, it's important to be able to push back on that a little bit. And it doesn't mean that most buildings will be able to accomplish both compatibility and maximum FAR. And it's important that you allow developers a reasonable, and architects too, you can't just have your client be paying for redesign after redesign because you have this nebulous, unstated goal. At the same time, once or twice, Ken Hayes is a pretty sharp guy. You can pretty clearly say to him, can we mean it? 3 stories is really what this can handle. That's enough to put it back
Thank
to
you
the
for
client.
that.
Tom?
So I'm interested in your Redwood City ARB experience. Can you just maybe briefly describe a controversial project in Redwood City and where you were on that project? And also, did the Redwood City ARB ever say no to a project?
I voted no 2 or 3 times. I can't remember whether it was rejected. To be honest, I think back, and there's a crummy little auto parts store where we pushed really hard to get better landscaping around the parking lot. And it's made one of the biggest differences I can remember. It's a store in El Camino. Just by reconfiguring a parking lot and getting more trees, it essentially cost the developer nothing. It was just a couple of good architects looking at what was a very poor architect's presentation. It made such a difference. I'm sorry, that's a digression from what you're asking.
And that was
about.
controversial?
No, it was not
Yeah.
controversial, but it was, I think maybe the opposite is also, I'm sorry, I can't think of too many controversial things. The meetings were at 6 in the morning and there wasn't too much community involvement.
6 in the morning.
Well, one of the members was a doctor, and doctors are very adamant about their patients in the morning. But I think Redwood City got pushed very quickly into this grand scale planning development that we're all seeing take place in Redwood City. There's a lot of large buildings go up that are not subjected to architecture review. What happened is we all agreed that we're going to go for this fixed plan, which is a very detailed stipulation of how buildings should be, a base, a middle, a top, things like that. And as the architecture board, we also bought into that. Looking back on it, it reinforced to me more than ever, you need to look at each building one at a time and don't just give over this authority. That wasn't controversial at the time. I think now it's becoming tremendously so.
So we have used our time. Peter, thank you so much for coming.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very
And
much.
I don't see any other burning questions here, so thank you very much. Appreciate your application.
That's right.
So our next applicant is Wen Firth.
Yeah, I was just doing his introduction.
Thought I missed 10 minutes of it.
Eric,
It's 10 minutes long.
raise your hand if you have a question.
Is this water?
Yes, help yourself. So we have allotted 10 minutes for each applicant. So if you'd like to make an opening comment or statement, feel free, and then just leave plenty of time for questions and answers if you would.
So my name is Wynn Firth, and I applied because I thought that a layperson's perspective added to the deep professional expertise of the other people on the ARB could be useful to the city and to the board itself. My own lay perspective is informed by living here for the past 16 years and actually working in town for 8 years as well. ARB hearings are complex events, which was really driven home. I was doing something else during your last council meeting, but I just looked at the video of it. And ARB procedures and the whole process is a complicated one. ARB hearings aren't charrettes, they're not critiques, they're not places where you can let your own personal taste run free as if you were the client. They're regulatory hearings. And they're a setting in which people have to apply qualitative standards to projects which are already subject to an enormous number of layers of regulation and specificity and air quality standards and building codes. And my skill set isn't in design, but it's in working with design and thinking about design and in regulating and design regulation processes. So reading codes and looking at staff reports, I used to help write them, and looking at proposed documents and reading environmental documents and listening to people and then trying to translate what you hear into good, useful findings of fact and conclusions of law and ultimately a decision. And of course, making the decision is something I haven't done on behalf of a city ever, but I have had a chance over my career to work with really good design professionals from whom I think I've learned a lot. Spent a fair amount of time being educated by the engaged and or irate public. And council members, of course. I first got to know my present neighborhood in 1967 because my then boyfriend, I'm still with him, lived in a condemned plumbing warehouse on High Street where the parking lot for the fire station is now. And so I've seen that neighborhood through many ups and downs. In 67, you could shoot a cannon down University Avenue and not hit any live person unless the varsity just got out or we were demonstrating. It's very different, but we moved elsewhere, and it was really hard for me to give up my life elsewhere to come back here as a trailing academic spouse. But in the past 16 years, I've come to really love it here, and I would like to participate.
So questions, council members? Eric?
So what do you think the architectural board now, sort of the current architectural board, does well and first of all does well, and second, could do better?
They seem to have a huge depth of knowledge about architecture generally, about safety, about green building, about building in this area, about relatively mid-range history of development here. They know a great deal about the economics and practical aspects of building. I think they sometimes have trouble getting from, I really don't like this project, to, or I really like this, or I'm concerned about that, to something that's actionable. And that can be difficult. I think they work hard to listen to the public. You can always get better at, work towards getting better at letting people know they have actually been heard, even if you can't agree with them.
Pat?
So talk a little bit more, if you would, about what would be more actionable direction from the ARB versus what you have been seeing them do. And also, if you would, about your notion of necessary findings of fact compared to how we seem to have been, the ARB has been treating those findings of fact in general.
I should tell you that I've only watched the videos of a few meetings, so I just have a very scattershot approach, impressionistic view, and I hesitate to say anything critical about anybody, particularly their beloved projects. But the way it works basically is staff prepares proposed findings based on those findings of fact, based on those conclusions that they have to arrive at before they reach their decision. They can become quite rote because of the volume of work that has to be done. And I think it's really useful, I'm speaking as a lawyer, of course, because that's my training. It's really useful to focus on those findings and the particular facts of each project as part of what you're thinking about, so that it really sharpens your thinking and I think produces better decisions. And if they should be appealed, it gives the council a much clearer roadmap of where things are going. I mean, I'm in favor of people who are in the minority explaining, at least in an oral statement, why they are voting no in terms of specific findings and conclusions.
And any examples of, or a description of what you think is a more actionable direction versus kind of some of the discourse and guidance that we may.
Well, they do two
have?
things at ARB. One of the things they do is more like a charrette. I mean, they really are working with the applicant, and they're speaking quite informally and very practically. I am thinking more, and that's useful. I'm thinking more about when push comes to shove and you have conflicting desires and you need to make a decision.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
So you were at the summit on Saturday,
I was.
along with 300 other people. And one of the big discussions was about density. Where should density go? What about younger people who live in the community? What about, turns out that the area that is right around here turns out to be the most popular in town. And not surprisingly. So talk to that a little. There was discussion of in-law units, there was discussion of people renting out rooms, there was discussion of doing micro units perhaps. Tell me, where are you on any of that? And if you're not anywhere, you can say so.
Well, I can say a few things. Generally, I'm in favor of smaller units as we build more units. Probably I speak as somebody who used to live in a big house and now lives in a little house, and it was traumatic at the time, but now I really like it. I also have a big house somewhere else, but which is cheating. I think we all know that, or it's the experience in all our Western cities and probably around the world, that when we say we can have more density without more cars because everybody's going to take the train, it's not true. And so that when you have more so my short answer is you should put more density where you can deal effectively with the externalities. And you know, I think the RPP is probably an example, I hope, of effective dealing with the externalities. And in downtown, I love, who would know that the President Hotel has 90 dwelling units per acre and is a good neighbor?
Exactly, right.
Corey.
Actually, I was just pointing to Greg.
Oh, I'm sorry. Vice Mayor Schmidt.
Someone earlier mentioned that the ARB should emphasize subjective components like compatibility, scale, massing. There's a lot of notable amount of ferment in town from Eichler neighborhoods, mid-century, asking for some protections for neighborhood design compatibility standards. What do you think of that? Do you think it's the role the ARB should be involved in what way?
Ms. Eichler mid-century subdivision, residential subdivisions in particular?
Yeah.
I basically think that is a position that the city council is going to have to address because that's a big scale policy decision. I have friends who are leaving town because they live in a beautiful Eichler in a beautiful neighborhood, and Eichlers are designed as a unit. It's like a Georgian row house terrace. You can't, or the Royal Crescent in Bath, you can't just keep, what you do to each one affects the other. And so myself, I would probably be advocating that the city council consider doing that and acknowledging that and trying in appropriate places to preserve it. I don't think that means that buildings have to stay the same. I don't think it even means they have to be single story, but I think that we are undervaluing that resource.
I have two quick ones, if I could. I want to clarify something because we're running out of time. Clarify something. You said earlier something about having a hard time saying, criticizing someone, and I appreciate that. But I just want to make sure. That you.
I meant gratuitous criticism.
Don't have a difficulty saying no to an applicant if a project isn't meeting muster.
The people I need to be liked at don't include every applicant. Yeah, no.
Okay.
Yes, I am capable of. My job has often involved delivering unwelcome news, and I could do that.
Okay, I wanted to clarify that. And then lastly, just one quick question here is, you talk about transition from one part of town to another town in your response, but do you think that applies, or how would you apply that from one project to another project?
Physically adjacent?
Yes.
I think it's a really important part of context. And needs to be considered as a key variable. The only reason the ARB exists is because you have qualitative standards that need to be applied by somebody. And the city's chosen to have it done by a committee of appointed people, most of whom are residents. So it's all about considering those things. And I don't know how to do it, but I certainly recognize good examples when I see it. To take a really radically different one, if you look at the glass box they stuck on the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, I think that works. Drove the neighborhood, created great anxiety before it was done, but I think it works. And I'm sure it works because the designers We're doing all kinds of things with proportions and materials and setbacks and view sheds that I don't understand. I can just see the result. So I'm not particularly fond of mimicking, and I certainly stand by the historic preservation concept that says new stuff shouldn't pretend to be old. But I think that there are ways that designers can and in this town must build new buildings that make the old ones look even better.
Thank you very much. We are out of time.
Can I ask
So,
one super quick one?
oh, sure.
So you work in Oakland now, and
I'm retired.
oh, you're retired in town.
I consult for
And no conflict with
Change
the,
Lab.
with the ARB meeting at 8:30 in the morning. You can make that.
No, I do not have to drive to Oakland. I'm a writer and a researcher, and
Good. Okay. Thank you.
last project was for the City of New York Public Health Department.
Thank you so very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So our next applicant is Kenneth Hu. Oh. So by now you know the spiel, you know the routine. So would you like to make some opening comments?
I'm a local architect, resident, father, caretaker for my father, 94 years old, and I enjoy reading the environment plus reading blueprints. That's my expertise. Also, a building official. I've been on the Arts and Culture Committee for Foster City for about 15 years, and I was on the Public Art Commission in Palo Alto a few years ago. Later on, got some family situation and all that, so couldn't continue. Architecture is capital-driven business. I pay full respect to the previous two applicants you guys interviewed, and but, something critically on my mind is quite important is the role of architectural review board commissioner per se. I mean, I think some certain type of social responsibility is critical. So this morning I made a few points here. I probably, if I could quickly share with you, and I like to just pinpoint right there. Not trying to abstract myself away from getting involved in the process and collaborate with the other commissioner. If I get chance to work on the board, but the 1% versus the other people in town, that's critical. I mean, like I said, it's capital-driven business that we're dealing with. I was from Taiwan originally, went to school in Michigan. Back in Michigan, I got a chance to understand the old money versus what nowadays is all new money in Silicon Valley. And I went to Detroit a few times, and also get a chance to meet their famous architect named Daniel Lipskin back in Cranbrook Academy, the Bloomingfield, that site. So, something has been on my mind for quite some time. Is that how do we, deal with these issues may come along if we are dealing with, any type of, how do you call discussion about how and what people are going to build, style-wise, whatever-wise. I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Questions, colleagues?
Okay.
Pat?
Yeah. So have you been following kind of some of the projects that have been coming through from the ARB and to this, some that were appealed to the city council? Have you watched that process at all?
Not much.
Okay.
But I was in the previous round of interview.
Okay.
And Karen asked me the question, but then, like I said, I spent some time reading the environment, and so I do want to pinpoint one interesting project, which is Survey Monkey project. The more I look at that project, I thought that probably the review board and also the architect could do a better job, there. And that,
In what ways?
The design, the office clutter, and from wherever angle, from across the train track, from standing right in front of it, from look at the aesthetic for the whole thing. It's not welcoming or successful, I should say. Don't want to say that in a sense superstitiously, but I don't believe in feng shui, but the geomancy is quite important, and that location particularly there, you can make it better. So that's how I feel about that project particularly.
Thank you.
Sure.
Liz?
So, let's take the other side of that.
Yeah.
What do you like in town? What in particular really would appeal to you?
Like I said, particularly in the in my application, back when I was in architecture school, Michigan, in UCLA, and I involved with an international competition called Architecture Without Style, because style is like you wear clothing, right? I mean, every several or certain years it changes, so we shouldn't get hooked up too much about the traditional versus the contemporary. I mean, we see very nice, impressive buildings along El Camino Rail, quite contemporary. I like those stuff, but on Lincoln Avenue, I mean, I like not 245 Lincoln. I like 265 Lincoln Avenue, because there's a courtyard kind of leads you into that space and make you much more involved with the environment. It's more welcoming. That's quite critical, I should say. Sure. Yes,
Wait,
Tom.
so you're saying Lincoln Avenue?
No, Lincoln. Linton.
Oh, Linton,
Yes.
Linton, okay, all right, good. Tom?
So what kind of architect are you, and where do you work?
Myself?
Currently, yeah.
I'm in residential and commercial. I'm freelancing.
And where, what cities?
Here, right here in Palo Alto.
Okay.
Yes.
So you do both commercial and residential?
Mainly residential.
Okay.
I do small commercial TI project. Yes.
Okay, Eric?
So if somebody comes to the ARB with a project that meets all the city's codes, but is
Mhm.
frankly mediocre, okay?
Mhm.
But if they can make it 15% larger, it actually gets quite a bit better. How do we think about something like that?
Larger? Is that what
Yeah.
you meant? If they
Yeah.
can make it
They
larger,
exceed
it
the
gets
height
better?
limits and the FAR ratios by 15%. How do we consider such an application?
But
How
Eric,
do we think about that?
Eric, you mentioned mediocre, means
Yes.
architecture design-wise, right?
Yes.
Okay. From my reading of the staff report, I mean, the staff did a good job, for presenting the project to the commissioner. So I will say, I'm going to utilize my expertise for reading the blueprints and provide my suggestions. But definitely there are certain things that they need to follow. I mean, I didn't understand the second part of your question. How do they, size up or scale up without following the...
So a design exception.
Design enhancement exceptions, variances, stuff like that.
Well, I'm going to think about it. I don't have an answer for you, but like I said, if it's a mediocre, if we can enhance, if there's some room for us to even get involved, read the blueprints, understanding that what they can do, I will provide my suggestion.
So I'll ask a question. On the application, it says identify projects or projects you find as good examples of architecture, and the application doesn't list any. And it also asks, describe an issue that recently came before the board that's of particular interest, and there wasn't one listed. So have you been watching ARB meetings, or do you go to them, or what's your experience with the ARB?
Sat in a couple times in the ARB meeting, but I'm very fresh in terms of process.
Mhm.
Even if I'm local and I'm architect, and but in terms of how ARB operate, I get a chance to know and learn more.
Okay. And can you mention a project you think is a good example of good architecture?
Like I said, 265 Lincoln.
Oh,
I
265
like
Lincoln,
yes,
okay.
yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so you have a minute to make closing comments if you'd like to.
No particular comments. So that's it.
Okay,
Thank
very
you.
good.
Sure.
Thank you so very much. So our next and final applicant is, I believe it's Floor Schmidt. And I think David went to.
Hi.
Good evening and welcome. Thank you for applying. Is it Floor?
Yes.
Okay. So our routine here, you know we have 10 minutes. So if you'd like to make an opening statement, opening
Yes.
comment, and then we'll ask questions and comments. And okay, so if you'd like to make some comments, and this mic is hot, so.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you for taking my into consideration my application for this position on the Architectural Review Board. I will be pleased to develop my interests on this subject and my opinion on two buildings on University Avenue. One is an existing building and the other one is a building coming. But they're both in the same scenery. So, it's okay. So, thank you. So, for the two buildings, they are at Cooper, the crossroads of Cooper Street and Kipling. And they are both, for the both buildings, I have no information. I just don't know nothing about requirements, programmation, or amenities. I'm just put myself in the position of the observer, and I try to figure out and decipher and understand better. So I just by feelings. So there is the 525 University, so at the crossing road with Cooper. So this is a remarkable building because it's this tower. So it's a high building, but he does be part of Constellation, and the manner of and the composition of a building introduce some scales. And if I am a pedestrian and I'm passing by, I can ignore the tower because the tower is in arm length, and so there is just a scale for the pedestrian for just to kind of in draft and all the ground floor of the building. So it's enjoyable. And I am interested by the building because if I take some distance, I can understand that all the design is the logical deduction of the position the building stand out on the land. So this is this is there is some evidence in this. For and the gap that's great in the canopy. There is over gaps, and there is something I want to say about urbanism, because I talk about scenery and not perspective, because scenery, it's for me the American urbanism, and it's kind of sequences you have, and all these sequences makes the earth and the sky touch and merge together more frequently than in a perspective view than you can have on city in European city like Paris, for example. So this gives the city kind of dynamism. And if you find on the way some stones, and so you can understand that this is block the fluidity and the and the yes, and the dynamism and something that just is going on by simply.
Okay.
And
We probably should leave some time for questions from
Yes.
colleagues too. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Colleagues, Tom?
So you said in your comments that lead platinum is an easy target compared to, I guess, what you've seen in Europe. Can you talk about that a little bit?
the other one I want to compare.
I think you were just talking about lead platinum in general as a standard, that you see that as an easy target to reach?
Well, what I think about the target to reach, it's not an easy target. It's a challenge, I think. It's really because you have to find a kind of compatibility with something who is coming, but it's the growth of the development. And so there is something to introduce and to manage. So this isn't so easy. And I can see with, for example, the University 429, that it's not so evident because the rules and the codes and give us some, and definitively something necessary, but I think it's necessary to have some latitude, and if you some latitude in the footprints or the heights to makes you the opportunity to change the perception of a building, because this is perception. You can, and this building on 429, it's a little bit massive because I think it's disharmonious. I don't know. It is what is the target? It's an addition of volumes, and with the frame of the existing lots, and I would expect in this case that it will be well balanced and fairly well balanced, and so or I don't know if or I can tell if the frame is just an opportunity to write a new building with some consistent exigence, and in this case I think it's not less is more in some case, and in this case it's not modern enough. So and I think that disharmonious and lack of evidence make the building feel massive. So I understand that it's not so easy to reach a target because there is a lot of subjectivity in the subject, on the matter. But I think if you consider what makes architecture, and if you consider that you have to take some strong position, and the building I have stated, the tower is a strong position, so and that can make some ideas begin more clear and more understandable for everybody.
Thank you, and you have just a few seconds to make any closing comment if you want to, very brief.
Yes. So I do believe that rules and codes are not efficient enough to produce good architecture, and city planning can't provide everything, because if you consider that the project is a creative process. In this process, there is some solution and ideas and thoughts that will appear. So that's why I'm not sure that restricting the code and not gives some opportunity to stimulate the thoughts. It's a good thing. I do think that if you have you restrict everything and you have a box to fill, there is less vigilance and probably less interest in the.
Thank you very
end.
much.
So
Thank you very much. Thank you for your application.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
So that concludes our interviews. I don't have any cards for any speakers. Is that correct? Okay, so this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
What's the next step here? What's the next step? What comes to council?